Welcome to Why Is This Good, a podcast by the Naples Writers Workshop. I'm Christine and I'm here with John. Hey, John.
Hello.
All right, it's my turn. And in keeping with my recent theme of choosing short stories that have or will be turned into films, I have chosen, I think, our third George Saunders story, which at this point, I don't even care. Anyway, this one's called Escape from Spiderhead, and it is being turned into a film this year. Imagine the worst you have ever felt times 10. That does not even come close to how bad you feel on Darkened Flocks. The time it was administered to us in orientation, briefly, for demo purposes, at 1/3 the dose, now selected on Amnesty's remote, I have never felt so terrible. All of us were just moaning, heads down, like how could we ever have felt life was worth living? I do not even like to think about that time. What's your decision, Jeff? Amnesty said. Is Rachel getting the Darkened Flocks or Heather? I can't say, I said. You have to, he said. I can't, I said. It would be like random. You feel your decision would be random, he said. Yes, I said. And that was true. I really didn't care. It was as if I put you in the Spiderhead and gave you the choice. Which of these two strangers would you like to send into the shadow of the Valley of Death? 10 seconds, Amnesty said. What we're testing for here is any residual fondness. It wasn't that I liked them both. I honestly felt completely neutral toward both. It was exactly as if I had never seen them, much less fucked either one. They had really succeeded in taking me back to baseline, I guess I am saying. But having once been Darkened Floxed, I just didn't want to do that to anyone. Even if I didn't like the person very much, even if I hated the person, I still wouldn't want to do it. 5 seconds, Amnesty said. I can't decide, I said. It's random. Truly random, he said. Okay, I'm giving the Darkened Flocks to Heather. I just sat there. No, actually, he said. I'm giving it to Rachel. Just sat there. Jeff, he said. You have convinced me. It would to you be random. You truly have no preference. I can see that. And therefore, I don't have to do it. See what we just did with your help for the first time via the ED 289-290 suite, which is what we've been testing today. You have to admit it. You were in love twice, right? Yes, I said. Very much in love, he said, twice. I said, yes, I said. But you just now expressed no preference, he said. Ergo, no trace of either of those great love remains. You are totally cleansed. We brought you high, laid you low, and now here you sit, the same emotion-wise as before our testing even began. That is powerful. That is killer. We have unlocked a mysterious, eternal secret. What a fantastic game changer. Say someone can't love. Now he or she can. We can make him. Say someone loves too much, or loves someone deemed unsuitable by his or her caregiver. We can tone that shit right down. Say someone is blue because of true love. We step in, or his or her caregiver does, blue no more. No longer, in terms of emotional controllability, are we ships adrift. No one is. We see a ship adrift, we climb aboard, install a rudder, guide him or her toward love, or away from it. You say all you need is love? Look, here comes ED 289-290. Can we stop war? We sure as heck can slow it down. Suddenly, the soldiers on both sides start fucking, or at low dosage, feel super fun. Or say we have two rival dictators in a death grudge, assuming ED 289-290 develops nicely in pill form, allow me to slip each dictator a Mickey. Soon their tongues are down each other's throats and doves of peace are pooping on their epaulets. Or, depending on the dosage, they may just be hugging. And who helped us do that? You did. All this time, Rachel and Heather had just been sitting there in large workroom 1. So that's the section that I think obviously summarizes what it is they're doing in this short story, which is testing all these people to see if they have this love drug.
That last section, I made a note on this margin. I wrote pitch.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to make sure I read that section because until that point, you don't really know what the point of the experiments are, like why would they be doing this? Anyway, I came across the story, like I said, because I've been exclusively looking for stories that are going to be films. And even though it was a Saunders one, I kept reading it. And then I was like, I don't even care. Like, it's so good already. What I learned after reading this piece is like, I think what's great about George Saunders is like his voice is apparent in almost every story. Aside from that first one, which I would reread now.
Oh, it's not his voice. It's a character voice. These are character voices.
Okay. And I knew you were going to say that too. I don't care if it's a character voice. I know that this is George Saunders. Like when I read certain lines and the way that they swear and the way like there's it sounds like true dialogue. It sounds like real people talking. The same way that I recognize a Stephen King story because it's like a band of boys.
The reason I'm confident in saying this is his character voice is because in that first George Saunders piece that we did, the two voices, the ballerina, the girl and the boy, were so distinct that I know he's capable of making distinct voices.
I know he's capable of making distinct voices, but this is like, you could show this to me blindly. And I would say, this is fucking George Saunders.
Well, the second one
way his characters talk, man. Even if it's just like he has a penchant for the same types of characters, whatever it is, like
that's a different man. Yeah, that could definitely be, but that would be different than pure voice, I think.
I guess my point is you could come up with a character that has this voice and you couldn't execute it the way George Saunders does repeatedly, which is there's like
but how many George Saunders stories have you read?
I just know this and that other one. It's like this is him. It's like it's him in 2 seconds flat. I can't explain it. He has like this X Factor thing where it's like this is fucking George Saunders. And
the similarities I saw between this one and the second one with the previous one is the Darkenflox, the trademarked names. Like he did something similar in that other story as well. It's as if he's working in like an alternate, like a Saunders verse or something. I noticed that right away as being a similarity between the two.
I'm sure if you showed me his entire body of work, I'd be like, yeah, there's certain ones that don't read like George Saunders. But I mean, in the same way that in our workshop, after 8 years of doing it, you could show me one that you wrote and I recognize it as you. Like there's something intangible, and you can try to write whoever you want. You could try to write a wildly different character and I'll know it's you. I guarantee it. And I'm not saying that I have some skill for picking it up, and I'm not even saying that I can tell you what it is I recognize, but there's certain people where it's like, this is you through and through. I am not well read. I'll admit that a million times. But reading this story within paragraphs, I was like, I'm going to love this the way I love the last one. And it's because the characters are so real. The voice is so modern. There's something like kind of like flippant and like detached about his characters. Like, even if they're like in this case, very involved in what's happening, like there's true consequences. There's still like this remove that they experience. Like their attitude about the world is jaded somehow. There's like the aunt in that other one that was just jaded, but there's something about being jaded that like offers this like tone and like levity to the story.
I think it might be helpful if you could point to some specific lines.
John, I don't know what you're on tonight, but
what do you mean? Look, I don't think voice is as specific as you're claiming it to be. At least the way you're describing it. Like jaded isn't a thing that I can find on the page. It's an overall effect, but a lot of people can do it. And a lot of people can make it happen in different ways. And it's the different ways that are the interesting thing.
Sure. I don't know necessarily how he accomplishes it.
I mean, one thing I noticed about the voice in here is like he used the word R-E, which is like I would never say that in speech. But the character is thinking it, when he's being influenced by these drugs and he's facing the girl, he says, soon something began to change. I mean, she was fine, a handsome, pale girl, but nothing special. And I could see that she felt the same me, i.e., what had all the fuss been about just now? Re is a shortening of regarding. So you put it in an email, like your email reply is regarding whatever the previous subject was. In another place, he just inserts a French word. We began the process of trying to talk après verbalas, always awkward. And he has these moments where the character is narrating. It's the first person. So the character is narrating this kind of in like a, not as a speech act, right? It's not like goodbye and good luck where you're overhearing the character tell somebody the story, but it's kind of like he's just telling it as if to us in some vague way. But the way he talks, the way he describes things changes when he's under the influences as verbulas.
Yeah.
Verbalus, I guess is how you say it. Like in the first section, when he first gets it, he added some verbalus to the drip. Soon I was feeling the same things, but saying them better. The garden still looked nice. It was like the bushes were so tight seeming and the sun made everything stand out. That question mark, he uses that question mark to like, almost like an uptalk thing. It was like the bushes were so tight seeming and the sun made everything stand out. It was like any moment you expected some Victorians to wander in with their cups of tea. It was as if the garden had become a sort of embodiment of the domestic dreams forever intrinsic to human consciousness. It was as if I could suddenly discern in this contemporary vignette the ancient corollary through which Plato and some of his contemporaries might have strolled. To wit, I was sensing the eternal and the ephemeral. that is a journey of voice. Like that is a journey of how his mind is changing the way he's able to articulate what is happening within that paragraph. And it does that every time he gets that drug that changes his verbal acuity. The same kind of effect happens. It's not as like, this is the introductory one, so I think this is the most pronounced, but it keeps happening. And I think he's also on the verbal loose when he uses the French word après, and then he's not on it when he uses re, which is interesting. But it's just like little things like that I noticed throughout. They kind of form this the voice that I take as the character narrating this piece. And even the word like in section 5, it's my mind was like reeling. This is after he finds out that Rachel had also had the same sexual experience with Rogan, the second guy. And that like he's not going to say that in that under verbal loose, but he does say it in that situation. I don't know. I thought that there was a lot of specific things that you could point to as far as the things that create the voice in this.
Yeah, here's one. My penis is sore, I said. Like, that is a Saunders line, man.
Coming out of the character's mouth.
It's coming out of the character's mouth, sure, but there are characters that you cannot write because you're not them. Just like I cannot write characters because I'm not them. I would argue for days that even the best writers can only capture a radius outside of their own knowledge and ability.
That's true. Yes. I'll give you that.
This is so tightly Saunders. I guarantee you, if I met him in person, like, he's not going to say penis, but he's going to sound like these characters. He's going to have this attitude. Like, and that's a lot of, I think, why, especially in our workshop, I can read someone's stuff and know whose it is. Because depending on how good a writer you are and how smart a person you are, your radius is a lot tighter. You're going to be writing things that sound a lot like you.
I think the ideal for me, from my point of view, the ideal writer is one whose radius, as you're describing it, is much larger.
Yeah.
I think it would be disappointing as a writer to be described as having a really tight radius like that.
It would be.
I don't know that George Saunders would appreciate that.
Oh, he can come talk to me if he wants, because the point is that I'm a huge fan. But to that point as well, I would also say that when you think of certain writers, their body of work there's similarities throughout all of it. I mean, there's some writers that try and maybe successfully tackle tons of different things. It's like, yeah, you can, but there are things in here that are similar to you. Like, just like Hemingway's shit all sounds the fucking same. There's writers that I think maybe have built careers on their ability to stretch themselves. But I would argue that when people are big fans of certain authors, it's because there's something similar throughout all of their works that brings you back to those authors, whether it's the characters or this overall approach that they have that is unique to them. And maybe voice is the wrong word, but it's what makes writers unique, or else we would all be able to write what everyone writes. I think Saunders has a radius, and there's a sweet spot for what that is. Too tight and you're not a good writer, but too broad and I guarantee you're unrecognizable. You're trying too much to do too many things that you cannot do well.
I've seen this before though. This isn't like unique to him. This stuff, some of the stuff that he's doing.
I'm not saying that any of this stuff is unique to him. I'm saying that I read this and I'm like, oh my God, I love this for the same reason I love this other shit. It's him doing the same thing he does really well, which is this voice, this attitude. And if I had to guess, I would guess it was him based on those two stories. It's just such a strong correlation. And like I said, I'm horribly read. So go ahead and like put me to the test and I'll fail it. But I think I'm right about what I'm pointing out in terms of writers having tendencies and abilities that are recognizable. And that's what makes them good and unique.
I'm not denying that authors sound like themselves from time to time. I just don't, like, George Saunders is so prolific. I don't think you can encapsulate everything he's done in this. And I haven't read more than these 3 stories by him, but I doubt that this is all he does. I would be shocked. I would be shocked if this is all he does. We read 3 stories, and one of which is much different than these 2. So I think it's evidence enough. But he's got that quirky. I mean, you can be quirky in different kinds of ways. But I don't know. I just don't like to make that broad generalization and leave it unchallenged.
Yeah. Well, what did you like about this story?
I enjoyed reading the story and I liked it. And it was a fun read. Read it twice. I think it all works together really well. This story made me think a lot about purpose. Like when the character at the end decides to kill himself, using the jailer's remote, who the jailer just happened to leave behind.
Right.
It made me wonder whether I was meant to understand that as being an accident or not, and what that says about how we read. Like, am I supposed to expect there to be more to the motives than is being portrayed? And should I look for more in their motives than is being portrayed? Or should I just take what's on the page literally and assume that there are no more motives that I need to discover in some alternate way besides reading what's on the page? You know, like guessing or analyzing. It's told in the first person from the point of view of the person who believes that he made his own choice at the end to kill himself and wasn't kind of tricked into it.
Yeah.
But I could see an alternate version of this where we come to realize at the end that he was tricked into it.
Yeah, that's a good point. That had not occurred to me reading this, but I could absolutely see where that's kind of the takeaway.
And I was left like, I don't know what to do with that. It's just a difficult question.
The idea that he might have been tricked, you didn't know what to do with, or?
I didn't know what to do with my conundrum of whether or not this piece wants me to make that leap or not. Sure. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. And I don't know what to do with my lack of answer.
Yeah.
That's me. That's my problem. But that was my reaction to it.
Yeah. Like I said, I hadn't really considered that. What I liked about it, kind of the ending and like his decision, because he thinks it's a decision, then at least he's not really talking in that moment as if like this is part of the experiment. He's more just kind of like, I'm definitely going to spare these other people and they're not going to be able to do it to these other people. So who knows? But I kind of like that was his own conclusion, this idea that, because, okay, overall, the premise is that like these people are at this facility being tested because they all committed crimes. So they're like some kind of prisoner, and like this is an option for a sentence that someone gave them, right? We don't know if they chose it or not, but this is like, it's this or prison. And this is obviously like this experiment that we're watching them do because it's probably the most fucked up, where he has to decide if he's going to like deliver the worst imaginable pain to someone that he was in love with earlier that day. And he's not in love with them now because of these drugs, but still like he views them as humans is what he says throughout. So this felt like, you know, a commentary on like how we treat prisoners on some level. If you want to like look at like the most relatable part of the story, we don't do these kinds of experiments. We don't have these kinds of drugs and capabilities, but we do treat prisoners as like less than human and expendable in a lot of ways. And there are attitudes about criminals treating other criminals that way. You know, they're like, well, which one do you want to give this drug to? And he's like, neither. They're humans. And they're like, well, does it make you feel differently knowing that this human like killed an elderly person and stole a bunch of drug money and like, you know, all this shit? And he's like, no, it doesn't matter because I've been on Darkenflocks and it's horrible. So like there's also this truth about, you know, if you've been to the pits of hell, you know what it's like, and that it doesn't remove your humanity, you know. So I liked all of that commentary.
At the same time, like all of that is kind of hovering here, but what the story is fundamentally is like this guy feeling guilty about the murder he committed, right? And trying to live up to that guilt.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of hovering. It's not like when I read this, when I finished reading it, I was like, I totally see how they're going to make this a film. The premise is ripe for film. Like they're going to introduce like new bullshit experiments. They're going to bring the facility to life. They're going to add a cast of characters, all this kind of shit. Like, cause the concept is fun. Yeah. And then like, you know, the fact that there's like, you said this hovering theme of like guilt and all this, they can play with it. And that like justifies it being a movie. But yeah, it's not, I don't know. I wasn't reading this thinking to myself like, oh, he feels guilty. I was more just like, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? What's he going to do?
That's not even like you don't see that until the end.
Yeah,
which is a fascinating structure. You know, we talked about the structure before of you start with the current dilemma, then you jump to backstory, and then you're back to that dilemma. That's like a frame that we've seen a million times. In this one, we don't find out what the backstory, like we don't find out his crime until the end. It's like the very end. It's the last section, right before he decides that he's dead. He wants to die.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the other things that confused me at the end of this was he killed himself. And then the story keeps going. It says, I was staggering around the Spiderhead looking for something, anything. In the end, here's how bad it got. I used a corner of the desk, meaning he smashed his head into the corner of the desk and killed himself, right? This is how we're supposed to understand that. And the next paragraph, what's death like? You're briefly unlimited. I sailed right out through the roof. And then there's another page and a half of him being dead. And then you get this line from somewhere, something kind asked, would you like to go back? It's completely up to you. Your body appears salvageable. No, I thought, no thanks. I've had enough. So not only did he choose to kill himself, he also is depicted as, or he's also telling us the story of him choosing not to remain dead. He's like, no, I'm actually certain this is what I wanted.
Yeah.
This after having seen all these other people, seeing kind of like, there's that brief image of the mother of his victim.
Yeah.
Mike Apple's mom, also in Rochester, a bony, distraught checkmark occupying a slender strip of Mike's bed. Like that image, I don't know, that it speaks so much in just that one tiny little moment. It's like she is destroyed, right? And like that's how he sees her, and that's got to feed into his guilt. Even though in this moment he's feeling like elevated because he's dead and he's no longer around. But I don't know. So that whole dying sequence at the end, my first thought was like, why is this here? I don't know, but it kind of reflects back on what I should have been understanding to be themes that were happening earlier on, which is it's so subtle. The story is so subtle.
Yeah, because it's like that's kind of what I was trying to get at with the idea that I can see why this gets picked up as a film, because it's like plot heavy, and it like the theme is there if you won't have a director that really cares about it. But otherwise, it's like superhero movies. All the themes are always the fucking same. It's like redemption, guilt. Like you don't even have to tell us what it is. It'll be in there, and it's so light that you could call it an action film, because that's really why you're there in the theater, to see the explosions. I think when you go to see this film and the trailer is going to be like, this is so fucked up, how do they escape? I mean, escape is in the title, so like I imagine that's going to be how it's pitched. Like, how do you escape? Oh, you can only escape by dying. You don't choose to die necessarily out of guilt or anything, but like, oh, you're going to grapple with death, and maybe George Saunders' theme is more like he said he wants to avoid killing someone at the end, but it's so light that Hollywood could do whatever the fuck they want with it, and like when I'm reading it, I'm just kind of like, yeah, it's there, but I just really like these characters and like the attitude about it. He's like, oh, I don't want to give it to that one, and I don't want to give it to that one. No, like I don't want to be part of this experiment. But he's not like so defiant that he's unable to like work with all of it. He seems like this character that's just kind of like plodding through the motions of these experiments, So he's detached, and he doesn't really care what the outcome is. Pretty early on that like it's only his mother that he really cares about anymore. Like he said, we don't really get like his whole like motivations, but in hindsight, that's why he feels kind of like a removed observer in all of it. He's just kind of like not married to the outcomes, because he knows like all this shit is, manufactured at some level. He's like, I was madly in love twice today. I vividly remember those feelings, but I don't feel them now. And he doesn't even feel sad about that. He's just kind of like, weird, another day at Spiderhead. Yeah.
One thing about the structure of this, I noticed this on the second read.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's no backstory. Like the backstory isn't introduced like in the beginning, like what got him there.
Right.
It only comes up when he's about to make the decision. That backstory, his understanding of himself because of that backstory, is what drives his ultimate decision at the end. So it kind of makes emotional sense for that to be when it comes up, even though it's hinted at before. Like Abnesti says, I forget what he refers to it as, your worst day ever, or that bad day, or whatever it was.
Oh, yeah.
But the way that this, like section 1 is him getting the verbal loose and experiencing a garden. So it's an introduction to like the setting. It's an introduction to the situation and the way the character is in the situation without introducing the main problem that's going to arise. The next section, immediately in section 2, is when the roller coaster starts. This is like the beginning of the experiment that starts the whole story and winds up with him at the end. But that first section is just kind of like a scene setting section,
right?
Which is this is set up in a different way than that other structure from other stories that we mentioned in previous episodes. Current situation, background, back to the current situation. We talked about that for Snow. We talked about that for the Joe Hill story, Black Phone.
Yeah.
And some other stories are like that. There's a lot of stories are like that.
Yeah, most.
But this is so different, and it's very interesting how different it is and how it works. Because when you start the main story, you take some of the threads that were introduced in the first section, in that scene setting section, and start weaving them together. You need those to get into what's going to become the main story. But the first scene isn't important to that.
Right. It's almost I don't know that he would have planned this, but it's almost like the reveal at the end of why he is motivated to kill himself and this like deep-seated feeling of guilt that he has. Because that last line is like you said, there's like a page and a half left where he's like outside of his body, hovering above, and he's talking about joining a flock of birds. And it says, I joined them, flew among them. They did not recognize me as something apart from them, and I was happy, so happy, because for the first time in years and forevermore, I had not killed and never would.
Yes.
So like that's kind of like we don't get the full backstory, like we don't get the full, I committed this crime, this is why I'm here, everybody hates me, I've reconciled that, and I've repented. We don't get that.
Everything he's enduring is a punishment. We can see that, but we don't know necessarily for what.
Sure. And we don't really know what his response to the punishment is, other than he seems very like distant, like I said, from like unattached to the outcomes.
Yeah.
The beginning scene is where he says like Jeff or whatever says like, thanks for your help. Or he says like, thanks for your help, Jeff. And he's like, of course, like only 1,000,000 more years to go.
He knows he has no agency. He knows he has no choice in the matter.
And he's got the best attitude he can, which is like, he still has some personality left, but he's not even being difficult. But anyway, by the end there, it's like we realize that this is part of the motivation of why he decided to kill himself. He's like, I'm not going to kill anyone else. I didn't come here to do that. They think I'm a bad guy. Anyway, I wonder if there's like something to be said for this. I mean, because like one of the themes here, I think, is like, how do we treat the people that we think are the worst people in society? It's looking at that. And then here's a guy who is among the worst of society, looking at others who are part of his class or whatever, and trying to decide how to dole out punishments to them. It's almost like a commentary, the fact that we don't get to understand him fully until the very end, that we don't appreciate who these prisoners are. We don't care about their backstory. Why would we get to know his? I think we're supposed to kind of like read it that way. I think we're supposed to kind of read it like, what's this guy gonna do? And then like, I don't know if this is me like being empathetic or like not buying into like the way the story is presented, but when the experimenter guy is like, oh well, she did really bad things, like I didn't feel it differently either. It wasn't a powerful piece of information. I don't really know that for any reader it would be, at least not in that moment, because we don't hear their evil backstory until then. We weren't told that they're terrible people. We're told about how he had sex with them and they fell in love. That's our first introduction to them. And then we find out they did terrible things. And then he says like, well, they're still people.
This is the same way we're introduced to him, the narrator.
Right. So I wonder if there's like something strategic about how we don't know their backstory or their motivations or their reactions.
That's good.
Yeah. I wonder if like we're just supposed to read this as like, yeah, they're technically prisoners. That's why they have to go through these bullshit experiments, but they're not necessarily being punished. It's more just like we deem them usable the same way we decide like beagles are really good for testing makeup products on because they're docile. It's like, this is your brunt in life, like we've decided that you're ripe for this, whether or not you're deserving of it. Because there's even this rapport between the experimenter and the main character. He's not saying every day like, all right, time to do your duty, like you're a piece of shit, get in there. They have all these like ways that they speak to each other that seem respectful. They seem to have that rapport. And then like I said, that's why I don't think at the end, I'm sure you're supposed to wonder whether he was tricked, but I felt like the ending there where the guy left his remote kind of spoke to the bond and the trust that they had, and they kind of alluded to that. Like he didn't view him as a prisoner, and the experimenter even makes a comment, Absentee, is that his name, like going into it the day, he's like, this is gonna be a terrible day,
Absentee is how I mispronounced his name when I was referring to it earlier.
What is
Abnesti.
Abnesti, whatever it is.
Absentee, I think, is like a Latin word.
Yeah, it means not present.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Amnesty is like, this is going to be a shit day. And it's because he knows that if they administer this Darkenflox, like these people are going to be driven to suicide. So he has some level of appreciation for the horrific stuff that goes on at Spiderhead. And it even seemed half-assed that he tried to convince this guy to choose one way or the other by introducing their backgrounds. I am curious how that'll be played up in the film. I'm sure they'll be like, these people are pieces of scum, but I wonder when you'll find that out.
I think one of the reasons I was confused about, or that I had that problem I described earlier about not being sure if I should be guessing that this is like all a setup to get him to come to the point of killing himself, was, first of all, I didn't know, like, why describe his death? Why describe his afterlife?
Right.
Unless there's a lesson in the death, which there was. But also the other thing was some of the ways in which the people behaved made me question whether or not they were influenced by drugs that weren't being presented to us. Just they had such strange behaviors sometimes, made such strange decisions. You're like, why would they do that? And is it just like, you could write it off as this is just the culture of the prison and they've acculturated themselves to it and that's what they do, or they've been influenced by some other drugs to just be docile in a vague kind of general sense. But those answers weren't there. I can't remember. I wish I could remember the specific moments, but there were times when I was like, oh, why? Like, maybe this is what it is. This made me think of the Stanford prison experiment where they got people to torture what they thought were other, like, you get people to sit down and say, okay, now you're a prisoner and you have to, this other person on the other side of the wall is doing things. And anytime, if I tell you to administer a punishment, you have to turn this dial to zap him. He's going to administer an electric shock. And they discovered that like most people did it. They did it to the point where they could hear somebody on their side of the wall screaming and crying and begging for help. And they would just keep turning it up when the experimenter told them, okay, zap him again, zap him again. So my thought when he sat him down and said, okay, you got to pick Heather or Rachel, who are you going to give this terrible torture to? I was like, it's a Stanford prison experiment. Like, what's he going to do? And then the fact that he had no human interest in either of them to distinguish between them two. Yeah. It's like, how is that possible that a person could be that detached from two people? Right. Where you don't just find one thing like, oh, I like her freckles, so I like her better. You know, that kind of thing, or whatever it is. Just something. It just felt it just didn't feel quite human. So that's what made me start questioning things about it.
Well, they said something like about how in the section that I read, they're like, oh, we must have really effectively brought you down to baseline, which I wonder if baseline is like a natural human state that we rarely reach. You know what I mean? Like we all have levels of anxiety, but like we rarely reach baseline.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's what's being portrayed here is the vague docility is baseline.
And maybe baseline is like you said, you know, he couldn't find one distinguishing feature that made him feel one way or the other. Maybe baseline is like the absence of bias, you know, like really truly looking at people as just like people.
Or not people. I mean, if you can't distinguish two people, then are they even human to you?
Well, he can distinguish them, but he doesn't, you know, feel differently about either, I guess.
I know that's the part that I just like, how can you not have any, like the emotional baseline is so removed from them. If he discovers this kind of like universal feeling of human kinship, but that's it. There's no individuation. Anyway, that was the thing that just made me start questioning things.
Yeah. That part does feel like a commentary though, to the overall point.
Could be. Yeah. Like it's part of the major theme. Yeah.
So do you have a takeaway? I'm sure I've said this before and it's not a good takeaway, but like if you have a universal theme or whatever, like we talked about in the last one, like what is the universal truth? For this one, it's kind of like, how do we treat the worst among us? Are they still human? Whatever. That's at least what I kind of came out of here with. That's cool to explore. But like I said, Hollywood is probably going to give this a very different treatment because it's so plot heavy. You remember it for very different things. And I've talked about this before. I couldn't tell you for which story, but there's something about like, if you can make your universal theme palatable by making it like commercially sellable, that's one way for you to like think about how to package your story. So if you have an idea that you're like, that sounds kind of boring, I don't know who would read it. And to be fair, a lot of people don't feel that way about their own stuff. But if you've ever gotten feedback where like people are like, it's like, think about the most Hollywood treatment you could give it. Think about the most plot heavy thing that you could do. And like, does your theme fit there? Or is there a way to just like spruce it up what it currently is? Like
specify it.
Yeah. So if George Saunders was like, I want to write about how we treat prisoners, like, first of all, I doubt that that's what he wanted to do, but let's say that that's what he wanted to do. It just doesn't seem like him.
Yeah, that's right.
Then maybe you would end up with a commercial story or with a story about prisoners. It's like, we've read a lot of stories about prisoners, whatever. And it feels like a very like common setting because it's like, oh, what happens? Okay. One route you could go is like to have a boring story, but like he upped the ante, made it unique in Hollywood by saying like, and they do experiments on people. Like, obviously this is not the progression that he came up with, but this is the progression you can come up with. So if you have a story about like unrequited love, congrats, you're one of a billion. So like, how can you make yours memorable? It doesn't have to be fantastical. It doesn't have to be like, and they're conducting experiments on prisoners, but like, how can you package the truth in a plot that you're still having fun writing, but part of you recognizes has broad appeal? Broad appeal, this is the part where you have to sell out. Like, it's like we remade things like Romeo and Juliet. We remade them with fucking, what's her name? Heath Ledger's not real sister, but it looks like him. Julia Stiles. Was she in a Heath Ledger film that was like, was he a masked
10
lover?
Things I Hate About You. That was,
No. Is it that one?
Yeah, Julia Stiles and Heath Ledger were in 10 Things I Hate About You. And that is a Shakespeare, but it's not Romeo and Juliet. That is Taming of the Shrew. It's a retelling of Taming of the Shrew.
Okay. I think that's what I'm thinking of here. Yeah. So yeah, it's like all these fucking stupid remakes. Like nobody's gonna watch Shakespeare play, but the plot is like pretty universal. So why don't we make hot teens do it? You know, like that could be a solution to a lot of stories. Is what if we made hot teens do it? You know,
this is what the idea of taking a universal theme and making it specifically like weaving it as like the motivation of your plot. That's like kind of building off what we were talking about in the last episode. This is how you wring as much as you can out of your theme.
Yeah.
Is you make all the aspects so that you like embody them within characters and situations and dilemmas, and everything that happens within the plot. The way the plot unfolds is an expression of the idea that you're kind of exploring. Yeah, that's great. And what you said about to make it mainstream is like you make it more plot heavy. So you make the plot elements like that. You make it more like action, or you just put it in a cool setting that could be put on screen or whatever, you know. That's good. Then you're doing literature, but you're also doing something that people are going to enjoy reading.
Yeah, it's kind of like, even if your end goal is not to think about like, oh, I want this to be made into a film, but like if you want to like a book deal.
My takeaway, I think, because this is what I marked up within the text, were those just little uses of language, like what I said about using like for regarding, and inserting the French word après, and then using the word like. My mind was like reeling as part of the narration, and then the way that in that first section when he's under the influence of the verbalus, just the elevation of his diction. I just thought that thinking about language in such a specific kind of nuanced way, I really liked the way that he did it in this. That was what I was marking up as I read it. So I guess that's my takeaway.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, like there's ways that you can like intentionally spice up the way your characters talk. And I made a note, and I'm sure you thought the same. When they first introduced verbalus, I wrote need. Because like I'm like, dude, like Adderall's one thing, right? I've considered starting an addiction there, but like verbalus, like sign me the fuck
for
up.
writers.
Yeah, sign me the fuck up.
One problem with the verbalus as it's depicted is it wasn't one of the girls was in the control room, and it said she became very literal minded. It's like, put a sock in it, and she's looking around for a sock.
Yeah, like the clip down is rough.
Yeah.
It's like being hungover. Worth it. But yeah, like anyway, back to your takeaway, like if you can inject some verbalus into your own characters, they don't have to be poetic, but you can think to yourself, like every time you write dialogue for those characters, how would they talk? Would they slip into this? Would they slip into that?
This is one thing, like when I see the word what is this? Like, is this something that somebody is saying to me? Is this something that somebody has written for me? Right? Thinking of the occasion of narration is an interesting thing to think about. But if I were writing something, I would not use re.
Yeah.
If I were speaking, maybe. I don't think I would use it, but I know people do use it in speech because it's so ubiquitous. You know, we do see it in email all the time, and I've seen it like you could do it in a text message. I just use the letter W for with in a text message, but I wouldn't do that talking. I wouldn't say W. I'd just say with. Right. So that kind of thing is like, what is the text that you're creating? Is it someone talking? Is it someone thinking? Is it someone like how is the narration happening? That's the kind of thing that could guide you in the way in which you employ language. This is a very specific thing where his diction goes from low to high, and he starts talking about Plato and using words that he wouldn't use anywhere else in the text when he's on the verbalus. But I don't know. Do you think people get purple if they use that too much for their own writing?
I'm also willing to risk that. Like, I mean, name a side effect. Bloody stools, death. I'm game for all of it, dude.
Just to get the words out.
Just get the words out and get that book deal. I just need one and then I'll quit.
Just one, I'll quit. Yeah. I swear I'll quit.
We're gonna get straight. We're gonna get clean.
All right. Thanks, guys.
If you enjoyed this episode, consider joining our Patreon. Your support helps us keep the show running. Find out more at patreon.com/whyisthisgoodpodcast. And for industry news, writing tips, and great short fiction, join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Naples Writers Workshop. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter at napleswritersworkshop.com.